I was set up with one of the people who was, collecting some of the historic records of Pearl, and they sent me a lot of imagery of the old horses. And
so this horse was a Pearl horse?
No, this wasn't. Actually, this was a horse. I made friends with the people that do the carriage rides downtown, and it was really funny because the guy who used to be the caretaker of this horse, his name was Wayne, and Wayne was from Nova Scotia, but he decided he wanted to be a cowboy, so he moved his whole family to Texas, but he is also a computer programmer. So by day, computer program. By night,
Texan.
Texan. So yeah, and his horse, he picked the biggest, craziest horse he could find, and the horse's name was Big John.
So
it was John horse? Wayne.
So is this Big John we're looking at?
That was the name of the horse, but that is not the title of the piece.
No, but the horse is Big John.
But yes, that was the name of the horse, and that was. So I spent some time with that horse and Wayne, and we talked a lot about horses, and we talked a lot about the harnesses that are on the horses, and I consulted him, or he consulted me, I'm sorry. I would go to him every few days. I would take a picture, and I would drive over to the stables, which luckily is down the street from my house. And I would show him, and he'd say, yeah, that's what they used, and that's historically correct, because he really knew his stuff too. He was, it was by accident that I bumped into him, and it just all worked out nicely.
So one thing that actually seems to be recurring in your work is a lot of your work is dialogues with history. History provides you with your research.
Yes.
And so you're actually connecting the past and the present in most of what you do.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah, I like that. I like that idea, and it's connecting the histories together. And so when I put this together, I was referencing old photographs and just whatever source material they could provide, and then eventually. But one of the things that I don't want, I think gets missed in a lot of these slides is it's my fault for not providing you details, but the way I painted really changed from the time, not only stylistically or the approach of making an image, but just kind of the sheer joy of what paint can do. And this painting, I had this enormous canvas, and talking back of that painting of the rose, where weighed a ton. I'm finding more and more that I'm just putting thicker paint on and thicker paint on, and just loving what paint does.
A computer monitor or a projector will never ever capture the thickness of paint.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's as much as I try to
which is why people have to come to museums and go to galleries and all of that to see the real thing. Right.
We're preaching to the choir.
Yes. Well, let's continue.
Okay, another small bird painting. This time, kind of catching it, like, don't you get away to that soul.
And here is another dog.
Yeah. Now this is there was what year is that? 2010. Yeah, that sounds about right. I was traveling around in my neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhood, just looking for imagery. And almost every weekend, I grab my camera and I just go driving around. Sometimes I go out in the country, sometimes I just stay in the city. But I'm always looking for things to take pictures of. I don't know what they're going to end up with. I would say 99% of them don't end up as anything, but just ideas. And I found this dog. It had been hit by a car. And I was thinking of the painting that Manet did of the fallen bullfighter, and that long. And this is also a drawing. This is a pastel, and just sort of that long format of this fallen warrior, being the pit bull, and this was and it was kind of scary because I was photographing this dog that had just looked like it had been hit by a car not that long ago. And then I realized that it belonged to a house that was just across the street, and it was in the morning, and I think they were just getting up. And I started thinking, like, what are they going to think? Not only did I hit their dog, but here I am photographing it like it's some victory. So I got out of there pretty quickly. But I promise, if this is your dog, I did not hit it. But the way that it was posed, there was a certain level of dignity to the way it was laying there, and there's an ambiguity to it also, that it might look sleeping, or is it dead? Where is what state is it in? And there's no context to it either. It's just this background that
And
has
so I was
a
going to say, it's
horizon.
interesting because I mean, in many of your paintings, you really get into the decorative backgrounds and whatnot, but this is very different, and what you've described, you know, it's a very somber tone by comparison to the more playful tone of some of your work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This as well. and this also is based on a reference to art history, as Manet would make references to art history. I like that idea, and it's based on a Zouberon painting of, I'm trying to remember the title of it, but it's a metaphor painting where there's a lamb that's tied up, sacrificial lamb. So, you know, on here I have, and this dog was never tied up. It was just, I made that sort of in that same context.
Mm-hmm. And a return to the rose.
And a return to the rose,
yes.
And the butterfly is just, you know, kind of as a symbol.
Symbol in this case.
Well, you know, again, sort of in the same reference. It's a colorless rose. It's sort of a symbol of life, but yet it's sort of like taken out in monochrome. You know, this was the next few paintings are going to be from shows that were done at. Well, those are really stretched out. It's done from a show at Flight Gallery, and I don't know if Justin and Ed are here tonight, but Flight is, you know, quickly becoming one of my favorite galleries, especially the back room of Flight. Some of the collections that they have of stuff hanging out there. So
oh, it's fabulous.
I was thrilled that they let me have a show there, and I absolutely love that gallery. I like what they're doing. I like their energy over there. So I wanted to try to do some new work, and I wanted to try to, you know, work with some of the symbols that had worked before, and then try to create more, something that, you know, I thought it sort of reflected the attitude of the gallery too, in a way. So I was trying to create more energy, more, you know, less static creatures, but more things that are engaged with this, you know, crazy-faced octopus playing a
And there seems to be a whimsical tone in
Yes.
this series.
Yeah, I was kind of lightening up for a change. This is, you know, the idea of the sort of the cartoonish face, the caricature face, sort of morphing into something that's a little bit more, you know, has this kind of visceral feel. This thing that's got, you know, wrinkles and a pudginess to it. So, you know, these characters have these kind of funny faces, but there's something very unsettling about them also, as they have these, you know, cute faces that turn into something that's a little bit more, you know, biologically like creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Like these in particular, yeah. So, you know, they're not the cute little ornate blowfish anymore. They're speckled and spotted and pocked and yeah, scary. Now this starts the last show that I did over at Blue Star, and this series again starts. You know, it's still there's some things that I just can't escape, and one of them is just, you know, the idea of markings, whether they're decorative or whatever. You know, I like the idea of visual rhythm to occupy a subject. And actually, this was a real dog that was running around my neighborhood. Yet another, you know, dog in distress that I bumped into. This dog had very advanced mange, and it was hairless. And what I did is I gave it the Dalmatian fur. That wasn't its real fur. I added that on. And the good news is that my neighbors and myself started taking care of the dog and started feeding it. And now the dog lives across the street from me, and she has all her fur back, and she's wonderful, but still barks at me every time I walk outside, and very, very loud too, I might add. So, but now this one is again a symbol that I've come back to in the past, and earlier there was a painting I'd done in the 90s of the same character that's called the cynocephaly. And this is one of the rare ones that I have that's titled of the name of the beast, and this it's not a beast that comes out in mythology, but more something in folklore. And in my studies about it, it's this idea that there are these creatures that had human bodies and dog heads. And there is a long history, apparently, from different cultures about this. There's a story about a Chinese character that had a dog head. There's Anubis from the Egyptians. But the one I was referencing more was the one that was from Europe, and the idea of people like Marco Polo who were traveling on trade routes and who would say they reported seeing these creatures that had bodies of people and heads of dogs, and they whistled, but the only thing they would eat is human flesh. And that would just kind of scare people off from their trade routes. So they were sort of used as weapons, and I always sort of referred to as sort of like an irresponsible anthropologist would, draw these things like, really, you saw that? Well, let me make it look better. And so, and people, and actually there was a discussion in the Catholic Church about St. Christopher, because there was this idea from maybe even in the early Orthodox that St. Christopher was of the cynocephaly race, and when he was baptized, his head turned into a human head. So, I mean, it's imagery that's been around a long time, and it has an interesting history to it.
Okay, let's just race through these last few because we've got to go to questions.
Go. Okay.
Anything you want to say about this one?
Yeah, I think they speak for themselves.
Okay.
Mercury skull, again, the idea of mobility and mobility.
Okay.
Mercury's, the messenger, but,
right,
the
right.
messenger is John the Baptist, severed head, black wings.
So borrowing from both biblical and mythological tradition.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And then this is a rare photographic show that you had at Soladias, correct?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm described as a painter, but we're all artists, and I'm an artist who paints and who photographs. And when I photograph, I certainly have. I mean, they both speak to each other. I take photographs to help me be aware of how to make a painting, and when I make paintings, it helps me be aware of how to be a better photographer. And this was a series that was done in Bar America. I had a long talk with the current manager of Bar America, Joe, who's a really great guy, and he would let me show up every morning to photograph every chair in Bar America, every ripped, torn up booth. If anyone's been to Bar America, you know what I'm talking about. And they don't even duct tape them, or if they have, they're like, forget it. But all of them, the way they're ripped and they're torn, they're like these wounds. And I think it goes back to the reference I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to associate these with the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. And in here, the long strip that goes across here, those were individual pieces. I photographed every chair in Bar America. And every chair in Bar America, and I wish I had a larger one to show you, has like a torn up seat. Sometimes when you sit in those chairs, it's just the wood. Sometimes there's some stuffing sticking out, and you can see that. And I called them the Argonauts. They're the warriors. They're the ones that have been in bar fights. They're the ones that have just seen hell and come back. And then this one rip, up there, it's Charybdis. That's the whirlpool. And if you look at it, it's just kind of, if you sit in it wrong, it's going to suck you in. The other ones are, I title them as harpies. They're, they're scratches. They're clawing. And so that's one approach to photography of many I take. We haven't really looked at much of my photography.
No, and I'm sure there's much more.
But maybe a question will come up about it.
To be seen at some future time.
Yes.
So let's turn the lights on then so we can get some questions from our wonderful audience tonight. Who has a question for Lloyd? And Katie has a microphone since we're recording. Question? Just raise your hand. Somebody? Okay. You want to pass the mic, please? Thank you.
Hi, Lauren.
With a lot of your earlier work, I guess the 2003 and 2002, where all the animals held a particular significance of a symbol, it didn't mention kind of the monkey or lemurs, or I don't know the specific type of animal, but just what that signifies to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the image of primates. I think that when I use them, they're always sort of a symbol of folly, and oftentimes they were created as there were some actual paintings of painters kind of making fun of themselves, where it's monkeys making paintings. So I always kind of latched onto that as the idea of folly.
Another question?
Y'all are letting me off easy.
Well, Lloyd, you shared. We have one. Okay,
question.
I was going to say you shared a lot of very useful information.
Lloyd, I hope you're taking care of my stove. I once sold you an old O'Keefe and Merritt.
Oh!
Hi, it's Bill.
Hi, Bill. I do still have it.
I'm great.
I remember that, yeah.
Glad to know it's in good hands. You've
I still have the original owner's manual you gave me too. I pull it out every once in a while and show people. It's like, look, it even has its birth date on Halloween.
good to know. You mentioned so much about Zurbaran and the old Dutch masters, and you never said anything about the Surrealists. And I wondered what Dali and the rest of the gang had to do with your imposition of these weird images on very realistic-looking images.
Yeah, I think that surrealism has always been a very liberating movement to many people who like to create work with that's sort of out in left field. And I think that there's also, I think it's kind of the modern, to me, one of the modern developments into surrealism, or from surrealism, that I think is pretty fascinating, are magazines like Juxtaposed, High Fructose, where I think they call it, is it pop surrealism? Is that right?
That's a current phrase,
and, yeah. And I really like that, and I don't think I'm connected to that as, I mean, I think there's definitely an interest in that. I'm still kind of latched into the old iconography, probably a little bit more so than what the surrealists were dealing with that sort of that landscape of anxiety or that landscape of the subconscious. I mean, I think my symbols are probably a little more rooted on history more so, but thank God for the surrealists.
They gave you permission to do
They
that.
gave me permission.
Yeah.
They let me do it.
Yeah.
Although they might revoke my license. I don't know.
We have a question in the front here. In the back, and then
I just wanted to ask you if you had ever thought about painting Saint Gwynfrith, the saint that was a dog, and
No, you'll have to fill me in on
I'll
that.
fill you
I am
in.
unaware. Saint who?
Saint Gwynfrith.
Really? There was a
Yeah.
dog saint?
Yeah. It was
I mean,
a
I know
dog.
there was a Saint Bernard.
It was a dog. It was a dog that was.
I didn't know who was.
They threw the sainthood out because they found out it was a dog. You know.
Really?
Yeah.
No. That's news to me.
Yeah.
I would love to hear that story.
I would love to see what you would do with that.
Okay.
Research.
Thank you. No,
Research. You have a homework
appreciate
assignment. You have a homework assignment.
that.
There's a question over there, and then do we still have
Joe has a question, and
Yeah.
then there's.
There was a question on that side, Katie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
can't get over there quite yet.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Katie. You talked a lot about your photography and your painting, but you're really an extraordinary draftsman, and I wanted to know a little bit more about your background and how you came to drawing and how you use it in relation to your work now.
Oh, with the drawing? Yeah, thank you. I was a compulsive doodler when I was in. Oh, good Lord! Starting from elementary school, I really had trouble paying attention to the lessons being taught, and I still sit in meetings and I'm still doodling. But I think that that is sort of the springing of an idea. Where ideas come from, and then the articulation of that. But if you're asking, like, really, I drew long before I started painting, and I was always a big fan of the crosshatch, and I always loved to try to create an illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. And I think once I kind of figured out, I used to use the worst materials. I would use just the cheapest paper, cheapest sketchbooks, and I would use ballpoint pens. Just Bic. The Bic was my art supply, and I would sit there and I would just do these real fine cross hatchings, just obsessively, and then I think, and then eventually I really had no confidence as a painter throughout my undergraduate studies, and I took painting classes, but I was awful. I should show you some of these pieces. Woo!
Wait, we have a question coming. Yeah.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Lloyd. I think I can probably claim to have been a fan of your work longer than just about anybody with the possible exception of
Joe,
your,
I think,
of your
bought my
mother.
first painting. Joe Bravo, everybody.
Oh, stop it. But I remember when we were undergraduates together, and you were studying Zurbarán, and you were trying to learn realistic and representational styles of painting at UTSA, which was not the easiest place at that time to do that. We take for granted now high fructose and pop surrealism and the figuration has come back. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be trying to paint representational styles of work, and how during a period when it was not necessarily in vogue, and it may have been hard to find instructors who could really take you to the skill sets that you've so illustriously achieved?
Well, I appreciate that. At most college, when most people were in art school in probably anywhere from the 70s up until the 90s, most of the instructors came out of the abstract expressionist school. And so talking about representation, doing anything representational seemed like a step back. And I certainly am empathetic to their cause. But yeah, it was sort of frustrating. I spent a lot of time in the library looking at a lot of books, reading a lot of materials, copying. In a more traditional sense, I would sit in the library with my little ballpoint pen, and I would get books on Michelangelo, Rembrandt. I would sit there and copy them. But then at some point, I did such a bad job of copying them, they ended up, morphing into something else. I would start drawing ahead, and the next thing I know, it had a snake body. I was just like, well, I'm gonna make that into a snake because I did such a bad job drawing the arm. So but it was good practice, and it was good observation. And I remember, one instructor who made a big difference. There's two people that I really owe a lot to in my time at UTSA. There was a graduate student, Ernest, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name. And I took one summer class with him and Ron Binks teaching that class. And I remember I was telling him that I was like, look, I'm really having trouble, painting like I want to. And Ron said, well, have you been to a museum? And I was like, well, not lately. And he says, what? He says, there's the McNay, there's Sam. He says, why don't you go to a museum? And I was like, well, and then he said, get off your ass and go to a museum and go look at a painting, stick your nose up into it, look at it. And then he just walked away. And it was so devastating to have a teacher yell at me like that. And I was like, he's right. And that really kind of snapped me out of it. And then poor Ernest, who was a graduate student in the TA, was kind of like, picking up the pieces like, well, here, let me give you some advice. And he taught me how to simplify my approach, because I was given a palette of colors and I couldn't do anything with it. I didn't know how to mix colors. I knew that, if you put blue and yellow together, you got green, and that was about it. And then, then later there was another graduate student, Sheila Horowitz, and she taught me about transparent paints and opaque paints. So a lot of the information I got was from my peers. And when I went to graduate school, I sort of experienced the same thing. But I had very supportive instructors who, again, led me into areas where I should really be looking at things closely. So I would say going to a museum was the biggest education I had. And Ron Binks was right. I needed to get off my ass and get into a museum and look carefully, look closely.
Great advice. And one last question in the front here.
I had a question.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Oh!
Tough crowd tonight. We'll let her have the microphone next.
Okay.
As a visual artist, most of your paintings are untitled.
Yeah.
And here you are sitting in front of a room of people, and you're trying to talk about what you have done visually. Can you talk a bit, perhaps, between what you do visually and how you articulate it orally?
That's tough, because the other thing that people ask for on top of titles are artist statements, and that's another thing that can be completely cringeworthy. If any of you have sat and read artist statements, how many good artist statements have you read? Show of hands. Yeah, I'm not seeing any. And I'm not saying that, you know, there's good ones, because there's some amazing ones
There
out
are
there.
actually many artists who write very well about their work, and you could read quotations from them, including from you, on the labels on all the works hanging in the contemporary galleries. Just another point of view about those statements.
Yeah, and point taken. And and not to say that everyone is bad, but sometimes they really limit the experience, and I really just try to avoid talking about it. I mean, you can see I'm squirming and deflecting up here as David's asking me questions, and you know, kind of looking at my shoes and like, well, geez, I don't know. Yeah, visual language and you know, the English language don't always connect. I don't think they have to. They're not. It's not required. Thank God.
And
what was your question?
Tammy has
Yeah,
one last
I don't think
question.
you give yourself enough credit for how you connect visually and verbally. You really do it quite well.
Oh, I appreciate
this has been
that.
terrifically entertaining. But my question was, what are you doing next? What are you working on now?
Oh, well, okay. That right now, after I finish the Blue Star show, you know,